Hello and welcome to this episode of WissLit. Today we will be talking to author Beth Heppe, whose book Flow is a collection of short poetic glimpses into the life of the Philadelphia Schuylkill River. Welcome, Beth. One of the great things about this show is that it takes me out of my element. It makes me read books that I wouldn't ordinarily seek out. Flow is one of those books. It's a wonderful book, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to read it. Can you tell us what was the inspiration for Flow?
Well, thanks for reading it. It is an odd construction, and I'm always grateful to Temple University Press for bringing it out. The inspiration, I walked across that Schuylkill River for many years. I went to Penn, I lived downtown, I looked at that river, I thought of her as a she. And before I wrote the book, I had written 5 memoirs. I wasn't willing to give up the I, the personal pronoun. And I was very intrigued by the idea of a creature who could never die and who was forced to look at her life over and over, run over its course every day. I fought for this book, and I'm glad that it ultimately came into the world.
What do you mean by that you had to fight for the book?
Because so many people thought it was odd, and I think it's one of the truest books that I've written. It is a book told in the voice of a river. It is as genuinely poetic as I want to be. I didn't hold anything back. And I think it's an emotional book, but many looked at it and said, what is it? Is it a book of poems? Is it a history book? What is it? And so I just kept taking it to places, and Michael Kleit of Temple University Press said yes. He said, we have no idea what this is, but we're going to publish it.
So you didn't start writing it. You got permission from the publisher first, or you had already written the story?
I'd written it. I won a Pew Fellowship in the Arts grant, and there's no way that I'm not going to write a book if I'm in love with doing the book. I don't write for the commercial market, but once it exists, you want to find homes.
It's part poetry, it's part history book. What was the research part of it like?
Huge. I spent 5 years going through all kinds of records. There's not really another book like it, and I was using the Schuylkill River as the medium through which I could look at that part of Philadelphia over time. So that's pretty wide open, that's pretty open-ended, and I was interested in the characters who might have walked across, gone across by boat or by bridge, or those who stood at her edge. And most of all, the way I chose the segments that I included after all the research was I was interested in her evolution from a river who was arrogant and supreme to sullied and destroyed to ultimately, an entity that had to decide whether or not she was going to hope because she was polluted and destroyed. And were there those who could save her? And ultimately, how does a river fall in love? And with whom?
Now, some of the elements, even I found in some of the darker passages, you ended them on a hopeful note.
Yeah.
Was that your intention? Are you a positive person and saw a better future?
I think it was honest. The river does have a much better future. One of the other inspirations, I actually run a business and I work for organizations. One of them is Brandywine Realty Trust. Jerry Sweeney is the CEO of that company, but he's also the chairman of the Schuylkill River Development Corporation. I knew what was going on to preserve and save that river. And every week there's new news about what's going on along the Schuylkill banks. So from a poetic and literary point of view, I had an inspiration from I love Philadelphia, and I want to bless this river as these changes emerge. I had that as well. And so I had hope.
Who were some of your go-to people as you were working on this project when you needed to find out a piece of history or you needed help on something? Where did you go?
Philadelphia Water Department. I got to interview someone about a flood and about the rats that gathered along the river's edge. Adam Levine, who works there as a historian, was extraordinarily generous in sharing some 900 images of the river with me. But there's this Historical Society of Pennsylvania, there's the libraries. I started at my own, I always start every project at my own Radnor Memorial Library, reading what I could. So, and then there are journals. I fell in love with George Childs while writing this book, and Anthony Drexel, so there's a lot to read.
Now, how would you describe the different chapters of the book?
I don't know.
Do you think of them as poetry? They were
I think of
they
them
read
as
lyrical essays to me.
Essay kind of kills it.
I know, it
That's
doesn't seem like the right word.
I thought of them as essential bursts of idea and language, and I don't have a category for it, and most of my books don't fall into a category.
And then each segment also at the bottom of the page, there was more of a historical text to it.
For those of you who really need to know, here are the facts.
Yeah. And then in some places you chose images and paintings and pieces of art.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what a great project. And I have a publicist named Gary Kramer to thank for getting it out there in the world, because who would have known it existed? I was very blessed that Philadelphians came out in support of this book in the way that they have. And it continues to be the book, as odd as it is, that English teachers talk to me about, students who are writing new things. They come to the teacher and say, this is a new voice, I want to do something like this.
I found, as I was reading it, it was one of the most peaceful books that I've ever read.
Right.
You know, I felt it was positive, it was uplifting, and it was a very, the book itself flowed like a river. It flowed through time, and it was a wonderful read.
Thanks.
So we'll be right back after this break.
Here at WissLit High School, our students love to read. Students love to read in the library, where they can pick from a large and diverse selection of books. Even with all those choices, students and teachers still manage to pick a favorite.
Twilight is my favorite.
I usually take my reading pretty seriously. I'm a big fan of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, and I also like Dante's Inferno.
So my favorite educational book, or at least book I read when I was in school, was Brave New World. But my favorite enjoyment book is probably, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, so the Dark Tower series. That's 7 books, but Dark Tower series.
I guess my favorite genre would be African novels, and I think my favorite would probably have to be Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe.
My favorite book of all time is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller.
At any time during the day, you can find students reading all over the school, for class or for fun. For many of our students, reading is a way to escape the real world and use their imaginations to get there. There's not many high schools that love reading as much as we do.
Welcome back. We're talking to author Beth Keppert. Beth, at what point did you know that you were going to be an author?
It's a different question if you say author or writer. I loved to write from the age of 9, and I wrote mostly poetry. And then early on in my career, I wrote and published a number of short stories. I don't know, even though my 13th book is coming out in a week and my 14th next summer, I don't still call myself an author. I think that you are constantly learning. It's not as if just because you write one book and maybe get some good reviews, you know how to write a book. You're tackling this beast all the time. So have I had a lifelong passion for writing? Absolutely. Do I consider myself an author? Not yet. And the minute I do, I'm dead.
So what was that first piece that got published?
Ooh, I actually know the answer to this question. It was an essay about a lost necklace that I had written for IO Women. And I chose that very small literary magazine because I was very obsessed with 2 writers, and I was following their career. And I go back and I do the research. What's the first place they published in? And so it was Lawrence Later, and later Natalie Kutz's career that inspired me early on. My first 5 books were memoir, and that's what I teach at the University of Pennsylvania. You know, I wanted to explore other genres too.
Now, when you were young,
years ago,
just started as a 9-year-old writing. Were there?
I was cuter then.
Was there an inspiration back then?
Yes, it was the tree, the skies, Zeus factored in. I would sit with my back against the tree, literally, and write these really bad sonnets. And that's the beginning. That's how it all started. But then over time, I had an English teacher at Radnor High School who was tremendous and who was actually memorialized in some ways here in Undercover, which was my first young adult book. She believed in my writing. I went to the University of Pennsylvania and studied the history of science. I did no writing there at all. I am very unschooled, and when my first book came out, and it did win a number of awards, I didn't even know what those awards were. I didn't know what was happening.
You've written young adult, historical fiction, paranormal, or not paranormal,
No.
I'm thinking psychological thriller. What's it like to write in so many different genres?
Completely confusing, but necessary. Because for me, I write for myself. I am not writing Twilight, and it's wrong to say I write for myself. I write to try to meet my own expectations of what literature should be. That's not what commercial success often looks like. So I'm always stretching myself, and there are very different voices in my books, and this new book, You Are My Only, has two different voices that are very different from each other. Dangerous Neighbors takes place in 1876 Philadelphia. I've just finished a prequel to that book, which is in a boy's voice in 1871. I try to move geographically so that while everything is rooted in the main line, there are as in With the Heart Is Not a Size, it goes to Juarez. So I feel that it is, and right now I'm working on an adult novel, and I'm back to writing a memoir about the teaching work that I do at Penn. It is essential to keep finding and stretching the voice, and if I were to write a series, I think I would be bored silly. I would be rich, but I would be bored silly.
So many different voices, so many different points of view. Do you sometimes intentionally say, I'd like to try this out?
Yeah.
Or do you come up with a story first and the story tells you what
I come up
you're gonna
with the sound of a story. The first line will occur to me, and most of the time I don't know where it's coming from. And I just keep staying. Sound is very close to mood, and I care a lot about the integrity of the sentences, and I let them take me. Is that a ridiculously inefficient way to write? Yes, it is. It is the only way I know how to do it.
And are you doing, do you write more than one work at the same time?
Yes, I have 3 that I'm working on right now. But I have a book coming out next summer, 10 years in the making, 85 drafts. Went from an adult book to a young adult book to an adult book. It's coming out as a young adult book, but as with all my young adult books, they're often mostly read by adults. I fought again for that book. It's coming out with the most astonishingly wonderful house, which is Philomel, a part of Penguin.
And having experienced all these different styles and genres, all these different voices, do you have one that calls to you the most? Is there one that you particularly loved
won't do that
writing?
to my
I mean, not
books.
a favorite book, but a favorite,
I loved writing
favorite
flow.
voice?
I loved writing flow. I am very excited about You Are My Only. I'm very excited. I wrote years ago a memoir that takes place in El Salvador. My husband's Salvadoran. That book took for 15 years, and it meant a whole lot to me. So House of Dance came out of an incredibly sad period in my life, and yet is celebratory and full of color and dance. So Heart Is Not a Size, I went to Juarez with a bunch of high school students and worked in a squatter's village. It means an enormous amount. And Undercover is sort of my life story in fiction. So these books, Nothing But Ghosts, is a tribute to my mom who passed away. So every one of them means something.
Many authors dream about the opportunity to write as their career. That's going to be their full-time job, and that's what's going to pay their mortgage, and that's going to pay the bills. Have you ever felt that way? Has that ever been your dream that you were going to?
I run a business. I would like to work less. It's not going to happen, not with the books that I write. I pursue the opportunity to publish again, and therefore have to be successful with my books. Success means I don't take huge advances, and I work to sell and to work through that advance as much as I can. No, it doesn't make me rich. I spend more time traveling to go places, or more money, and or making my little bookmarks. You know, it's not about the money, but there are fantastic conversations that ensue as part of the writerly life, and I love that.
Now, you also write articles, magazine articles, and journal articles as well?
I did that for a long time, and I occasionally still write for the Chicago Tribune, but my business takes a lot of time.
And you do some teaching as well?
I teach at Penn on alternate semesters because I can't, it takes about 30 hours a week, and I have to do all my corporate work and all my writing work and then give those 4 months to those kids.
What course is that?
It is memoir.
Okay.
I teach literary nonfiction and memoir.
Okay, well, stay tuned. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
When I grow up, I want to be a psychologist.
When I grow up, I want to be a writer. When I grow up, I want to be a professional soccer player.
When I get older, I might want to be a police officer or a firefighter.
When I grow up, I want to be a brain surgeon.
When I grow up, I want to be a scuba diver.
When I grow up, I want to be a teacher.
When I grow up, I want to be a father.
When I grow up, I want to be happy.
The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said that 16% of all fatal crashes are caused by distracted drivers. In 2008, 5,800 people were killed from texting and driving.
When I grow up, I want to be.
Welcome back to our conversation with author Beth Keppert. Beth's latest novel, You Are My Only, is coming out Tuesday, October 25th. Beth, can you tell us a little bit about the novel?
Yes, I would love to do that. This book, as with all of my books, was quite a process. It began as a book for adults, it is now coming out with Egmont, so it's a young adult title. There are two characters here. One is a 14-year-old girl named Sophie. She's living a strange and cloistered life, moving constantly town to town. The second is Emmy Rain. She's 20 when her 4-month-old baby is taken from her. Emmy Rain goes in pursuit of that baby, and these two stories intersect.
Now, what does the term young adult mean to you?
Yeah.
Young adult is such a big phrase in writing today.
It's a marketing category, and it should not, in my world, limit the readership of a book. In this case, there is, as I said, a 14-year-old narrator and a 20-year-old narrator, and these stories go back and forth, and therefore it really straddles that young adult. To answer your question, young adult is typically considered, a teen or a young person is telling the story from their point of view and not with the benefit of looking back over time. Because often you'll get a past tense, but it's very wise from the adult perspective, and these are not these books. My young adult books, some are written in third person, some in past tense, some in first person present, but nonetheless, they do not pretend to have the adult perspective put back into them. Emmy, I think of her as an adult. She certainly has been through a lot, married, a baby, a kidnapping, and she ends up, Emmy, in an asylum that was inspired by the remains of Byberry, which was the Philadelphia State Hospital at North Philadelphia.
It sounds like there's a dark tone to the book from what we've talked about before. You know, Flo is so uplifting.
Yes.
Is this also an uplifting story, or is it a darker tale?
It's really interesting. It's getting really wonderful reviews, and they all talk about the optimism and beauty that is in this book. It's not a grimy, ugly, horrifying book, because Sophie, who's been cloistered in these houses, ends up moving next door to these two older women and the boy they are raising named Joey. She sees life, and she pursues real life. Emmy discovers a roommate named Autumn, who with her strange level of energy is able to help her through what she's going through. There is a lot of love in this book, but there's a lot of suspense as well.
So how did you make that transformation? You said it was originally adult, and then they transformed it to YA. What kind of changes did you make to turn it into a
Well, first of all, it was originally set in the 1950s. Sophie was 40 years old, and all we ever had from her were flashbacks to 13, 14, 15. I think that this is actually a more active way to tell the story. These characters' intersections are more interesting. Sophie had the gloss of looking back. I needed to ramp up the momentum. I needed there for both of them. Individually, they had to have scenes where what is going to happen is the question of the reader, and they had to collide. And I was able to do that with this format.
Now, the story now, is it a first-person story, third-person?
They're both, they're alternating chapters. So, yes, they're both telling their stories, but they have very different voices.
They're telling them from the first person in both cases?
Yeah.
As an author, I was constantly told to increase the tension of the book. That's what readers want. They want more tension. Does your book follow a typical arc of rising and falling tension, ever increasing towards the end?
I don't know what typical is.
Yeah.
I don't know what typical is, and I don't want to know what typical is. This book has more suspense than my other books. Are always considered quiet, although there is, to me, a great crescendo, because I'm interested in what's happening to the character, to the development of the character. Other readers sometimes want these external elements, you know, the crush of plot. I find that false sometimes. I find it it's not nearly as interesting to me as really understanding the human heart. So, yeah, I don't know what typical arcs are, but there's definitely a rise and a fall and a rise. So, yeah.
Do you think, as a young adult novel with the protagonist you selected, is this a novel that is going to have a broader appeal to a bigger audience? I hope so.
And the bloggers out there, I am a blogger, a very active blogger. I often have 2 entries a day. I'm looking at how to write. For example, this morning was James Wood in the New Yorker talking about what beauty is in writing, and I reflect on that. I look at other people's books a lot on my blog. But the bloggers, the community, have really embraced You Are My Only, and I am deeply indebted to them. Without those bloggers, I would be nowhere. But Family Circle's excited about it, and they've done something in November, and I feel like this should be the time, 13 books in, to have one that sells a little bit more than the others do.
Right, right. Do you actively seek out book bloggers to review your novel? Do you look for authors?
Well, they sort of have found me, and we have a lot of love. And so we go back and forth, and I look at what they're doing, their lives, and I don't use them. And that is the great mistake that authors make. I'm going to use bloggers, I'm going to send them my books. It's not the way it goes. This is a conversation. They are people. They have time, and they're being kind to give some of it to me.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We want to thank author Beth Keppert for coming with us today, and good evening.
Thank you.